from Georgetown, I got on a bus straight to the Cameron Highlands. Nestled in the mountains, the temperatures were way cooler. It was my plan to do a one-day trek, but to my dismay, all of those tours seemed to be unavailable for the 2 days I was there. I stayed in the town of Tanah Rata, hoping for more options in terms of food and entertainment, but it was actually all rather limited. My only option was to go with a day tour, including a visit to the tea plantations and the mossy forest in one morning, and very commercial activities in the afternoon. The name Cameron Highlands comes from the British colonial administrator William Cameron, who stepped foot in the area in 1885. He immediately saw the potential of the region to become an agricultural hub, and in the 1920s, tea plantations were introduced. Of course, I don't think I have to say that sadly the wealth was not shared with the local communities who were actually exploited and submitted to really harsh work conditions under British rule. The mossy forest is worth a visit, but don't expect a big hike. There is only a small path where you're allowed to walk on to avoid damaging the ecosystem. You'll see giant ferns, vegetation in very lush and deep green that makes it all look quite unreal. And at the end of the path, you're basically presented with some breathtaking views over the mountains. In the afternoon, the tour was definitely quite disappointing. We went to a strawberry farm for strawberry picking, and there were a few other visits to a market that had nothing of interest in there. I ended up just getting an ice cream, and finally a temple. These were all definitely activity fillers. I'm not going to lie, I was very happy about leaving the Cameron Highlands. It was definitely a little bit of a disappointment, and I was quite excited to go back to a big city. And honestly, Kuala Lumpur was such a nice surprise. I was expecting to find a city completely built from the ground up in enviable high skyscrapers, futuristic looking structures that, whilst are quite impressive, for me personally hold little meaning. I was then positively surprised when I could see there was so much more to the city than the Petronas and its surrounding modern, luxurious area. Little India, for instance, and especially Chinatown, ended up having so much character, where the contrast between old colonial architecture and the modern skyscrapers in the background is definitely a living testament of a rich past and even a richer present. The Sultan Abdul Samad building is so impressive that I was surprised this wasn't a symbol of the city. Built in 1897, this iconic landmark showcases a stunning blend of Moorish, Islamic, and Indo-architectural styles, a bow to Malaysia's colonial history. It was named after Sultan Abdul Samad, and it originally served as the headquarters of the British colonial administration in Malaysia. In front of the building, there is a Merdeka Square, where events often take place. Even though the charm of the old parts of the city are my favorite part of Kuala Lumpur, of course I couldn't miss the sight of the famous Petronas Towers. I confess that I didn't go up and I simply admired the towers from outside, but if you do want to visit, bear in mind tickets sell out really quickly and you have to book them in advance online. In the KLCC Plaza, they also do a light show every night in the fountain, and this is absolutely free to attend. The Petronas Twin Towers were completed in 1998 and actually held the title of the tallest building in the world until 2004, with a total height of 451.9 meters. I have to say that in person it's definitely quite impressive, and I think the architecture is really smart. The architect was Cesar Pelli from Argentina, and he incorporated Islamic-inspired geometric patterns reflecting the Malaysian Muslim heritage and culture. I always try to get on a free walking tour if I can, and I had one of the best walking tours ever in Kuala Lumpur. I obviously didn't film or photograph much during the tour, but I learned so much. I learned, for instance, that Malaysia has 9 kings. And when I tried to ask more questions about this monarchy, I noticed that freedom of expression is also quite limited. The Tissot monarchy was established after Malaysia's independence from Britain. The guide also told us that it was quite hard to explain who are the people of Malaysia. The indigenous people account for only 1% of today's population, but since many aren't actually registered, it's very hard to tell how accurate the numbers are. The labels are various nowadays. You may have the Malaysians and the Malay. You have the Malaysian Malay Muslim, the Malaysian Chinese Christian, you may have the Malaysian Indian. It seems like locals are categorized first by the country where they were born, second by their heritage, and finally their religion. This makes Malaysia a true tapestry, a representation of so many regions from Asia. And actually, the tourist slogan from the country is Malaysia, truly Asia, which, bearing in mind the amount of representation that you have in a single country, sounds very true. The artistic scene in Kuala Lumpur is absolutely brilliant, especially around Chinatown. Try not to miss Petaling Street. It's definitely a must if you're in Kuala Lumpur. There's plenty of really brilliant street art in there for you to explore, and most of the scenes depict the day-to-day life of the Malay, some of their history, some of their traditions and customs, and you'll see there's almost a childlike nature to them, reminding me a lot of the same style of street art I saw in Georgetown. If you are into culture and art history, I have to recommend the Islamic Art Museum. This is the biggest collection of Islamic art in Southeast Asia, and you can definitely spend a few hours in there, especially because it's very nicely air-conditioned and you can go through the galleries and really admire the beautiful art that you see in there. The entry price is just around 3.50 British pounds or 4.50 US dollars at the time of my visit, and I definitely feel like it was very cheap for what I could do and see. On the topic of Muslim culture, I would also recommend a visit to the National Mosque of Malaysia. It has a very modern architecture and it was completed in 1965. The place is absolutely massive with a capacity of 15,000 people. If you have some time and some energy to spare, I absolutely recommend the National Gallery as well. The entrance is actually free, but sadly I was misled by the Google Maps schedule and didn't realize the museum will be closing just an hour after I went. So basically I had about 45 minutes before the staff started to kick us out of the museum because it was going to close at 5 instead of 6 as I initially thought. It's really a shame because the museum is brilliant. It has some really good pieces that really color a little bit into the history of Malaysia. I took a train to visit the Batu Caves, likely the most famous attraction of Malaysia. These are located about 13 kilometers north of Kuala Lumpur, and it just takes about 30 minutes by train to get there. The Batu Caves are not only one of the most famous and relevant Hindu temples in Malaysia, but also a natural wonder. Housed within a 400-million-year-old limestone hill, this is the kind of place that makes you feel small and irrelevant in the great scheme of things. The main cave, named Temple Cave or Cathedral Cave, features high ceilings and is home to various shrines dedicated to Lord Murugan, the deity of war and victory in Hinduism. My advice is definitely to visit early to avoid the worst of the heat, but I have to say that after climbing 272 colorful steps and getting inside a cave where humidity only goes up, I was absolutely drenched and feeling quite uncomfortable. It was disappointing that even though this is one of the most touristy places in Malaysia, there wasn't any kind of information about the caves themselves for tourists like myself. Of course, it's a place of prayer and thousands flock here every year to practice their religion. But bearing in mind all the thousands like myself, mostly ignorant about the religion, interested to learn as well about the natural wonder the caves are, it will be good to have some sort of informational points. So I went to the internet. To me, what's interesting is that in both Hinduism and Buddhism, caves seem to hold a very special place. I learned through my research that caves are seen as natural sanctuaries by these religions. They are deep and hidden, suggesting an inward journey, making it ideal to practice meditation, prayer, and worship. Way before Western explorers found the caves in the 1850s, these were already known to the local indigenous as sacred. The site actually only began to be used for Hindu worship in 1981. On another day, I did a different day trip to Putra Mosque. This stunning mosque is located in Putrajaya, Malaysia's administrative capital, about 25 kilometers south of Kuala Lumpur. I took a bus, a journey about an hour, and the mosque is definitely quite impressive and distinctive. In my head, it will always be the pink mosque. The facade is made of pink granite and it has a beautiful pink dome, and the minaret is one of the tallest in the region. The place is also massive. It can accommodate up to 15,000 worshippers at a time. I have to say everything else around the mosque seemed incredibly eerie. I think maybe because it's the administrative capital, you only see really fancy big buildings. The streets are very clean but weirdly empty. When I was on my way back to take the bus, I went through this park that was just very beautiful and well kept, but where were the people? A tiny small story, I visited the National Textile Museum in Kuala Lumpur, mostly because I was desperate for some air conditioning, and guess what? The air conditioning was broken. So, well done. I still recommend a visit if you have time to spare. It's a very tiny gallery and you just get to learn about the rich history of textiles in the region, which is a very important cultural artifact in Malaysia. The last place I visited was a bookshop called Book Excess. Definitely very interesting interior. I have to say the books itself were not my sort of books. Not to be snobbish, but these were definitely more commercial kind of titles, and I personally have a more niche taste for a lot of the literature, so I didn't buy anything, so it was probably for the best. This is all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like my video, subscribe for more content. See you soon!